All right, let's talk about genetics. We all remember the basics from high school biology, right? You've got dominant genes, you've got recessive genes. Seems simple enough. Well, it turns out genetics is a whole lot messier and, honestly, way more interesting than that. Today, we're diving into the fascinating ways our genes actually interact.
I mean, think about it. If it was just a simple case of one gene always winning, wouldn't the world look a lot less varied? Why do we see traits that are a blend of parents, or a mix, or something totally unexpected? The answer goes way beyond those simple Punnett squares we all had to fill out.
And that answer has a name: genetic interaction. This is the big picture term for all the ways genes work together, or sometimes against each other, to create a final trait. This is exactly why those classic clean ratios, like 3:1, get broken all the time in the real world.
Now, there are a few different types of genetic interactions, but for this explainer, we're going to zoom in on just one: allelic interactions. This is all about what happens between the different versions, the alleles, of the exact same gene at the same spot on a chromosome.
So let's start with a concept we think we know: dominance. But it's not really a simple on or off switch. It's more like a spectrum. And it's along that spectrum where things start to get really cool.
First, you've got the classic model, complete dominance. This is textbook stuff. One allele is just so powerful, it completely covers up the effect of the other one. So if a cat gets an allele for black fur and another for white fur, the black one is the boss and you get a black cat. Simple, straightforward, this is our base. But what happens when neither allele is strong enough to call all the shots? Well, then you get incomplete dominance. The perfect example is the 4 o'clock plant. If you cross a red one with a white one, you don't get red or white babies. You get pink ones. Neither allele totally dominates, so they just blend, kind of meeting in the middle.
Next up is codominance. Now, this sounds a lot like the last one, but there's a huge difference. Instead of blending together to make something new, with codominance, both alleles show up, fully and equally. There's no mixing, just them showing up to the party side by side. So here's an easy way to think about it. Incomplete dominance is like mixing red paint and white paint to get pink. You've created a new blended color. Codominance, on the other hand, is like taking that red paint and white paint and making a red and white spotted flower. Both original colors are still there, totally distinct and visible.
And we have a perfect example of this happening in our own bodies: the AB blood type. If you get an A allele from one parent and a B from the other, your blood cells don't make some sort of in-between type. Nope, they express both the A and the B markers on their surface. That is codominance right there.
Okay, so far we've been talking about genes that just have two versions, like a big A and a little a. But what if a gene had more options on the table? This is where genetics really starts to open up.
This whole idea is called multiple allelism. It's pretty simple, but super powerful. It just means that for a lot of genes, there aren't just two choices, but 3 or 4 or even dozens of possible alleles out there in a population. And that, of course, opens the door for a massive variety of traits from just one gene.
Let's go back to blood types for a second. The ABO system isn't just a great example of codominance, it's also a perfect example of multiple alleles. In the human population, there aren't just 2 options for this gene. There are 3, A, B, and O, and they combine in all these different ways to give us our blood types.
And believe me, it can get even more complicated. Check out coat color in rabbits. One single gene controls it, but it has 4 common alleles. And what's really wild is that they have a dominance hierarchy, like a pecking order. The allele for full color beats everything. The chinchilla color beats Himalayan and albino, and Himalayan beats albino. It's this intricate ladder of dominance that creates all these different coats from just one gene.
So now that we've got the basics down, let's look at some of the really dramatic, high-stakes consequences. Because these interactions aren't just about what color a rabbit is. Sometimes it's literally a matter of life and death.
Let's start with a really cool concept called overdominance. You might also hear it called heterozygote advantage. This is a wild situation where having 2 different alleles for a gene is actually better for you, better for your survival, than having 2 copies of the same allele.
The most famous example of this is sickle cell anemia. If you have 2 copies of the sickle cell allele, you get the severe disease. If you have 2 normal copies, you're super vulnerable to malaria. But if you're heterozygous, if you have 1 of each, you get this amazing survival advantage. You have only mild sickle cell symptoms, and you get a major resistance to malaria, a huge benefit.
Now, on the complete flip side of a survival advantage, you've got lethal genes. And yeah, they're exactly what they sound like.
These are alleles that when they get combined in a certain way are fatal. Most of the time this happens when an organism gets 2 copies of that lethal allele.
A classic case study for this is coat color in mice. So the allele for a yellow coat is dominant. But here's the thing. When you cross 2 heterozygous yellow mice, something really weird happens. You don't get that standard 1:2:1 ratio of babies you'd expect. So why not? Well, it's because the combination of 2 dominant yellow alleles is deadly.
The result is pretty grim. The offspring that inherit 2 copies of that yellow allele just don't survive to be born. And that completely skews the math. Instead of that neat 1:2:1 ratio, you get a living ratio of 2:1. 2 yellow mice for every 1 non-yellow mouse. That missing group, they're the ones that tell this deadly genetic story.
So, what's the big takeaway from all this? Well, we've seen that dominance isn't just an on-off switch, it's a whole spectrum. We've learned that genes often have a whole menu of options, not just 2. And maybe most importantly, these subtle interactions can have massive consequences, creating huge survival advantages or even being fatal.
Think about it. We've just scratched the surface of what can happen with a single gene. So what does that say about the mind-boggling complexity going on right now with the tens of thousands of genes that are orchestrating everything that makes you, you? It's an incredible, intricate dance. And honestly, we're just beginning to understand all the steps.